The uppercut from Quinn Russell's tiny fist to Colton Coleman's throat hit like divine retribution, crashing down on his character. In 0.3 seconds, the world of this 6'2" bully crumbled completely. Quinn Russell, the petite 5'3" teacher, had just transformed the school's prince into a writhing mass of flesh on the floor, unable to breathe, unable to speak, unable to believe what had just happened. The 450-pound force concentrated into her knuckles crushed his larynx like paper. His 210-pound body flew backward 2 meters and crashed into the opposite wall with a sickening thud. But to understand why this punch was so devastatingly perfect, we need to go back 3 weeks, when Quinn walked into Riverside Academy looking like an innocent new teacher, but carrying the skills of a trained killer. 3 weeks earlier, Quinn Russell stood in the parking lot of Riverside Academy, clutching her worn leather briefcase. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine campus. At 26 years old, she looked more like a student than a teacher with her 5'3" frame and 115-pound build. Her soft voice and gentle demeanor masked 8 years of Delta Force training. The brick buildings loomed before her like fortress walls. She had no idea she was walking into a war zone. Quinn thought her biggest challenge would be lesson planning and grading papers. She couldn't have been more wrong. Colton Coleman owned Riverside Academy, the way kings owned their kingdoms. At 18, he stood 6'2" and weighed 210 pounds of pure muscle and entitlement. His father sat on the town council, his mother chaired the school board, and his family's donations had built half the campus. Teachers feared him, students worshipped him, and administrators protected him. The quarterback's Letterman jacket hung on his shoulders like royal robes. His expensive sneakers cost more than most teachers' monthly salaries. Colton had never met a teacher he couldn't break, and Quinn Russell looked like his easiest target yet. If you're already hooked by this story of justice, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of underdogs rising up. And if these stories inspire you as much as they inspire me to tell them, consider hitting the thanks button below. Your support helps me continue sharing these powerful moments that need to be heard. Thank you so much for being here with me. The first confrontation happened during Quinn's second week. She was writing algebra equations on the whiteboard when Colton sauntered into her classroom 15 minutes late. His heavy footsteps echoed through the silent room. All eyes turned to watch the show they knew was coming. "Sorry I'm late, Miss Russell," he drawled, emphasizing her unmarried status with a smirk. "I was handling some important business." Quinn turned from the board with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her military training had taught her to assess threats instantly, and everything about Colton screamed danger. "Please take your seat, Colton," Quinn said softly, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. She could feel the class holding its breath. Colton didn't move toward his desk. Instead, he leaned against the wall and crossed his muscled arms. "Actually, I think I'll stand," he replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been told no. "The view is better from here." His eyes traveled down Quinn's body in a way that made several students shift uncomfortably. Quinn felt her jaw clench, but forced herself to remain calm. The classroom fell into an uncomfortable silence. Quinn realized this was a test, not just of her authority, but of her survival in this place. "Colton, you're disrupting the class," she said, turning back to the board. Her hand trembled slightly as she continued writing. Behind her, Colton's deep chuckle sent chills down her spine. "I'm just admiring the scenery, Teach. You don't mind, do you?" The question wasn't really a question. It was a declaration of power, a statement that he could do whatever he wanted. Quinn finished the equation and set down her marker. When she turned around, Colton had moved closer, now standing just 3 feet away. His height advantage was intimidating. He towered over her like a predator, sizing up prey. "Is there something specific you need help with?" Quinn asked, keeping her voice professional. Inside, her Delta Force training was cataloging his weaknesses: overconfident posture, exposed throat, poor balance on his heels. Colton's smile widened. "Oh, I think you're the one who needs help, Miss Russell. This is my school, and you're just visiting." The bell rang, breaking the tension like a snapped wire. Students quickly gathered their books and rushed for the door. Colton lingered, letting the room empty before approaching Quinn's desk. His shadow fell across her gradebook like a dark cloud. "Let me give you some free advice," he said, leaning down so his face was level with hers. Quinn could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something darker, the scent of a predator marking territory. "Teachers who don't play along don't last long here. The last one learned that lesson the hard way." Quinn looked up into his cold blue eyes. She saw cruelty there, and something else, the absolute certainty that he was untouchable. "What happened to the last teacher?" she asked quietly. Colton's grin turned predatory. "She had an unfortunate accident," he said, straightening up. "Slipped down some stairs, broke her arm, decided teaching wasn't for her after all." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Quinn understood perfectly. This wasn't just bullying. This was systematic intimidation backed by money, power, and violence. Over the next week, Colton's harassment escalated with military precision. Each attack was calculated to push Quinn closer to breaking. It started with verbal assaults during class, crude comments about her appearance delivered just loud enough for everyone to hear, suggestive remarks about what she really needed from a man like him. Quinn maintained her professional composure, but inside, her warrior instincts were awakening. She found herself analyzing his patterns, memorizing his schedule, preparing for war. The social isolation came next. Colton issued a decree that spread through the school like wildfire. Anyone caught talking to Miss Russell would face his wrath. Suddenly, Quinn found herself eating lunch alone in her classroom. Students avoided eye contact in the hallways, and other teachers gave her nervous looks before hurrying away. The loneliness was crushing. Quinn hadn't felt this isolated since her first week of Special Forces training, when instructors systematically broke down recruits' psychological defenses. Then came the property destruction. Quinn arrived at school Monday morning to find her car vandalized with spray paint. The word "bitch" sprawled across her hood in bright red letters. Security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned that weekend. The administration offered meaningless apologies and promises to investigate. Quinn knew no investigation would come. She was completely on her own in enemy territory. The public humiliation reached new lows when Colton's tech-savvy friends photoshopped Quinn's face onto explicit images. The doctored photos appeared on social media with captions suggesting she was available for private tutoring. Quinn watched her professional reputation crumble in real time. Parents demanded she be fired, and the administration seemed eager to comply. Principal Peterson called Quinn into her office with barely concealed hostility. "Maybe you should consider if this position is really right for you," she suggested with false concern. Physical intimidation followed psychological warfare. Colton began appearing wherever Quinn went, lurking by her classroom door, blocking her path in narrow hallways, standing uncomfortably close during faculty meetings. His presence was suffocating. Quinn felt like prey being stalked by a patient predator. The worst incident happened in the parking garage. Quinn was walking to her car when she heard footsteps echoing behind her. She turned to find Colton and two teammates following her. Their muscular frames looked enormous in the dim lighting. "Going somewhere, teach?" Colton asked, his voice echoing off concrete walls. Quinn's heart hammered against her ribs. She quickened her pace toward her car. The footsteps behind her matched her speed. "We just wanted to talk," Derek Martinez called out, his tone mockingly friendly. "Nothing wrong with a little conversation, right?" Quinn reached her car and fumbled for her keys. Her hands were shaking with adrenaline and suppressed rage. The boys surrounded her vehicle. Quinn realized she was trapped. "Look," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't want any trouble." Colton laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Trouble? We're just being friendly. Aren't we friendly, guys?" His teammates chuckled in agreement. Austin Hayes cracked his knuckles loudly. Quinn felt the familiar surge of combat awareness flooding her system. Her Delta Force training was screaming at her to neutralize the threats, but she forced herself to stay calm. This wasn't Afghanistan. These were students, and she was supposed to be their teacher. "Please, just let me leave," Quinn said quietly. Colton stepped closer, his bulk blocking her escape route. "What's the rush?" he asked, his breath hot against her face. "We barely get to spend quality time together." His hand reached out toward her arm. Quinn's military reflexes almost triggered a devastating response, but she caught herself at the last second. Instead, she ducked under his reach and slipped between two cars. "I have to go," she called over her shoulder, practically running toward the exit. Behind her, she heard Colton's voice, calm and confident. "You can run, but you can't hide forever, Miss Russell. This is just the beginning." The breaking point came on a Wednesday evening. Quinn was staying late to grade papers when she heard familiar voices in the hallway. Through her classroom window, she saw Colton approaching with Kyle Patterson and Derek Martinez flanking him. Their expressions were predatory, focused. Quinn's pulse spiked. She was alone in the building, trapped on the second floor with no witnesses. This felt different from the parking garage, more serious, more dangerous. Colton pushed open her classroom door without knocking. The three boys filed in like a pack of wolves entering a sheep pen. "Working late again, Miss Russell?" Colton asked, his voice deceptively casual. Quinn's trained instincts screamed danger. She stood up from her desk, calculating distances to the door. All three boys were bigger and stronger than her, blocking her obvious escape routes. "The building is supposed to be locked," Quinn said, backing toward the windows. Colton's smile was cold as winter. "Security knows we're here," he lied smoothly. "We told them we needed to discuss my grades with you." Kyle and Derek spread out, creating a triangle formation. Quinn recognized it as a basic hunting pattern. These weren't random bullies anymore. They were predators moving in for the kill. "What do you want?" Quinn asked, proud that her voice remained steady. Colton stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow over her desk. "I want you to understand something," he said quietly. "This is my school. These are my teachers, and you don't belong here." His hand slammed down on her desk, sending papers flying. Quinn flinched despite herself. "The question is, are you going to make this easy, or do we have to do this the hard way?" Quinn felt her back hit the wall. There was nowhere left to retreat. For the first time since arriving at Riverside Academy, she was genuinely afraid. These boys weren't just trying to intimidate her anymore. They were escalating to something much worse. Colton stepped forward until he was towering over her. His hands pressed against the wall on either side of her head, creating a cage of flesh and muscle. Quinn was trapped completely. His face was inches from hers, his breath hot against her cheek. "Here's what's going to happen," Colton whispered, his voice deadly serious. "You're going to resign tomorrow morning. You're going to tell everyone you realized you weren't cut out for teaching. And you're never going to mention our little chats to anyone." His hand moved toward her throat. Quinn felt the familiar surge of combat awareness flooding her nervous system. 8 years of Delta Force training were screaming at her to strike first, strike hard, and neutralize the threat permanently. But she held back. These were still students, still technically children under the law, no matter how dangerous they seemed. "And if I don't?" she asked quietly. Colton's smile was pure evil. "Then you'll have an accident," he said simply. "Just like Miss Patterson did last year. Stairs can be so dangerous, especially for clumsy teachers who don't watch where they're going." The threat hung in the air like poison. Quinn realized she was completely alone, with no help coming, no system to protect her. The administration would cover for Colton, the police would believe his version of events, and she would become another casualty in his war against inconvenient teachers. Unless she fought back. Unless she stopped being a victim and became what she'd been trained to be, a weapon. After the boys left, Quinn sat alone in her darkened classroom. Her hands were shaking with suppressed adrenaline and rage. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in 2 years. It rang twice before a familiar gruff voice answered. "Colonel Williams," the voice said. Quinn took a deep breath. "Sir, this is Russell," she said quietly. "I need to activate Protocol Black Widow." There was a long pause. When Williams spoke again, his tone was deadly serious. "Confirmed, Agent Russell. You are authorized to proceed with extreme prejudice." Quinn spent the next week transforming from victim to predator. Her military training kicked in completely, turning her modest apartment into a tactical operations center. She spread blueprints of Riverside Academy across her kitchen table. Red X's marked camera blind spots, escape routes, and potential engagement zones. Her laptop screen showed detailed profiles of Colton and his crew, their schedules, their weaknesses, their pressure points. The intelligence gathering phase was methodical and thorough. Quinn installed micro cameras in strategic locations throughout the school, hidden in air vents and behind picture frames. She tracked Colton's movements for days, learning his patterns like a sniper studying a target. Every Friday at 5:15 p.m., he made a sweep of the second floor with his crew, looking for teachers working late. It was their hunting time, isolated, no witnesses, perfect for intimidation. Quinn practiced her combat sequences every night. Her small apartment became a dojo as she rehearsed strikes, blocks, and takedown combinations. She focused especially on the uppercut, a devastating technique that could end a fight in seconds when executed properly. 450 pounds of force delivered through perfectly aligned joints could crush a larynx or shatter a jaw. Against multiple opponents, she would need to neutralize the biggest threat immediately. Colton's size and leadership made him the primary target. The psychological preparation was just as important as the physical training. Quinn meditated on her intentions, clarifying her mission parameters. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, protection, and sending a message that would prevent future victims. She thought about Miss Patterson, the teacher who'd been accidentally pushed downstairs, and all the other women who'd suffered in silence. Someone had to take a stand. Someone had to show these predators that their actions had consequences. By Thursday night, Quinn was ready. Her equipment was positioned, her tactics were rehearsed, and her mindset was locked in. She set her alarm for 5 a.m. and went to sleep with the calm confidence of a professional soldier. Tomorrow would be the day Colton Coleman learned that some teachers bite back. Tomorrow, the hunter would become the hunted, and Quinn Russell would transform from victim to warrior in a single devastating moment. As she drifted off to sleep, Quinn's last conscious thought was about the perfect uppercut she would deliver. She visualized the trajectory, the impact point, and the shocked expression on Colton's face when he realized his world was ending. Some bullies never learned until they met overwhelming force. Tomorrow, Colton would get his education. Watching Quinn plan her counterattack in complete isolation, knowing what's coming for Colton, but also understanding the terrible position she's been forced into. What would you have done in her situation? Comment below, because I am genuinely curious how you would handle systematic bullying when no one in authority will help you. Friday morning arrived like Judgment Day. Quinn woke at 5 a.m. with the calm precision of a soldier preparing for combat. Her Delta Force training had taught her that the hours before engagement were critical. Proper preparation meant the difference between victory and catastrophe. She performed her morning routine with mechanical efficiency. Combat breathing exercises, protein breakfast, equipment check. By 7 a.m., she was mentally locked into mission mode. The school day passed in slow motion. Quinn taught her classes while simultaneously running tactical calculations in her head. Every interaction with Colton was observed and catalogued. His arrogant swagger, his dismissive comments, his absolute confidence that he owned every person in the building. At lunch, she watched him hold court in the cafeteria like a king addressing his subjects. His teammates laughed at his crude jokes, while other students kept their distance. Quinn noted Derek's sprained wrist from his accident earlier that week, Kyle's nervous energy since his car brake failure, and Austin's jumpy behavior after his locker incident. During her final class of the day, Quinn felt the familiar pre-combat calm settling over her nervous system. Her heart rate dropped to 60 beats per minute, her vision sharpened, and her awareness expanded to encompass every sound and movement in the building. At 4:30 p.m., she dismissed her students and began her performance. She needed Colton to believe she was staying late as usual, grading papers and working alone. The bait had to look natural, vulnerable, irresistible. Quinn arranged her papers deliberately across her desk. She positioned herself where she would be visible through the classroom window, appearing absorbed in her work. Her micro-cameras confirmed that Colton and his crew were already positioning themselves on the second floor. Derek covered the main staircase, Kyle blocked the emergency exit, and Austin prepared his phone to record their lesson for Quinn. Everything was proceeding exactly as she'd predicted. These boys were creatures of habit, and their arrogance made them predictable. At 5:10 p.m., Quinn heard the familiar sound of expensive sneakers squeaking against polished floors. Colton was making his approach. She took one final deep breath and centered herself. In 5 minutes, either she would be free of this nightmare, or she would be another casualty of Riverside Academy's toxic power structure. There was no middle ground, no negotiated settlement. This was war, and wars were won by superior tactics and overwhelming force applied at the decisive moment. The classroom door opened with deliberate slowness. Colton entered first, followed by his 3 lieutenants. Quinn looked up from her papers with manufactured surprise. "Oh, hello, boys. Is there something you need?" Her voice carried just the right note of nervous uncertainty. She needed them confident, aggressive, committed to their attack. Colton's smile was predatory. "Yeah, Miss Russell. We need to finish our conversation from last week." The boys spread out in their practiced formation. Quinn tracked each movement while maintaining her facade of innocent confusion. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said, gathering her papers as if preparing to leave. The motion was calculated to trigger their hunting instincts. Colton stepped forward, blocking her path to the door. "Don't play dumb, teach. You know exactly what we're talking about." Austin raised his phone, the red recording light glowing like an evil eye. "This is going to be educational," he said, with teenage cruelty. Kyle cracked his knuckles while Derek flexed his shoulders. All three boys were high on anticipation and the absolute certainty of their power. Quinn stood up slowly, clutching her papers against her chest. She needed to appear as vulnerable and helpless as possible. "Please," she whispered, backing toward the windows. "I don't want any trouble." The fear in her voice was perfectly calculated. These predators fed on terror, and she was giving them exactly what they craved. Colton advanced like a shark, sensing blood in the water. His 6'2" frame towered over her 5'3" figure, the size difference stark and intimidating. "Trouble?" he laughed. "We're just having a friendly chat about your future here." Quinn let her papers scatter as she backed into the corner. The boys tightened their circle, cutting off all apparent escape routes. Inside her mind, she was calm as ice. Every movement, every word, every gesture was designed to lure them into the perfect position. Colton needed to be close enough for her to strike, confident enough to drop his guard, focused enough on his dominance that he wouldn't see the attack coming. "Here's the deal, Miss Russell," Colton said, stepping within arm's reach. Quinn could smell his expensive cologne and the underlying scent of adolescent aggression. "You're going to resign first thing Monday morning, clean out your desk, pack your little car, and disappear forever. If you do that, we'll let you leave quietly." His voice dropped to a whisper. "If you don't, well, accidents happen to stubborn teachers." Quinn pressed herself against the window, trembling visibly. Inside, she was a coiled spring, ready to unleash 8 years of lethal training. "What if someone finds out?" she asked, in a small voice. Colton's laugh was harsh and confident. "Finds out what? 3 honor students having a polite conversation with their teacher? Who's going to believe your word against ours?" His arrogance was complete, total, perfect. Exactly what Quinn needed. "I'm scared," Quinn whispered, and for a moment it was almost true. She was scared of what she was about to become, scared of crossing the line from teacher to warrior. Colton leaned in closer, feeding on her apparent terror. "You should be scared. But if you're smart, you'll do exactly what we tell you, and nothing bad will happen." That was when Quinn made her move. The attack happened faster than thought. Quinn exploded from her cowering position against the window like a compressed spring suddenly released. Her right foot planted firmly, her hip rotated with perfect biomechanical efficiency, and her entire body channeled 450 pounds of force through her rising fist. The uppercut traveled from her waist to Colton's exposed throat in 0.4 seconds. The impact was devastating. Quinn's knuckles connected with Colton's thyroid cartilage with surgical precision, compressing the delicate structure by 2 inches. The sound was subtle but terrifying, a wet, cracking noise like stepping on a large insect. Colton's eyes exploded wide in shock and agony as his airway collapsed. His massive body launched backward with the force of the blow, flying 2 meters through the air before crashing into the opposite wall. Colton hit the wall with a sickening thud and slid down to a sitting position. His hands flew to his throat as he gasped desperately for air that wouldn't come. The sound he made was inhuman, a wet, choking rasp like a dying animal. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth as he struggled to breathe through his crushed windpipe. His 210 pounds of muscle and arrogance had been reduced to a writhing, helpless mass in less than a second. The 3 accomplices stood frozen in disbelief. Their phones captured every moment of their leader's destruction, but their brains couldn't process what they'd just witnessed. Tiny Miss Russell, the meek teacher they'd been terrorizing for weeks, had just turned their untouchable quarterback into a gasping, broken thing on the floor. The impossible had become reality in one perfect moment of violence. "Holy shit," Austin breathed, his phone shaking in his hands. "What the fuck just happened?" Kyle and Derek pressed themselves against the walls, suddenly understanding that they were no longer predators, but prey. The small woman in front of them had revealed herself to be something infinitely more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. Quinn stood over Colton's writhing form with the calm confidence of a professional soldier. Her breathing was steady, her posture relaxed, her expression almost serene. "I warned him this would happen," she said quietly, her voice carrying none of its previous fear. The transformation was complete and terrifying. The cowering teacher was gone, replaced by someone who radiated lethal competence. Colton's gasping grew weaker as his crushed larynx swelled shut. His face was turning blue, his eyes rolling back in his head. Quinn pulled out her phone and dialed 911 with perfectly steady hands. "I need an ambulance at Riverside Academy immediately," she said in a concerned teacher's voice. "A student has been injured and is having trouble breathing." The performance was flawless. She sounded like exactly what she was supposed to be. A worried educator trying to help. "What's your emergency?" the dispatcher asked. Quinn knelt beside Colton with theatrical concern, while his three friends watched in stunned silence. "One of my students appears to have injured his throat," she explained calmly. "He can't speak and seems to be having respiratory distress." She placed her hand on Colton's forehead in a gesture of comfort. He tried to speak, but only managed a wet, gurgling sound. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They found Quinn Russell performing CPR on Colton Coleman, while his three teammates stood in shock. "I don't know what happened," Quinn explained tearfully. "We were talking about his grades when he suddenly grabbed his throat and collapsed. I think he might have choked on something." The EMTs immediately intubated Colton and rushed him to the trauma center. His condition was critical, his prognosis uncertain. Principal Peterson arrived as the ambulance departed. She found Quinn sitting in her classroom, visibly shaken and concerned about her students' welfare. "It was so sudden," Quinn explained, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "One moment we were discussing his algebra grade, the next he was on the floor, gasping for air. I've never seen anything like it." The performance was Academy Award worthy. No one suspected that the fragile teacher had just delivered a blow that would end Colton's football career forever. The police investigation was perfunctory. Officer Martinez interviewed the three witnesses who could only stammer about how their friend had suddenly collapsed while talking to Miss Russell. Austin's phone showed Colton approaching the teacher normally, then suddenly falling backward, clutching his throat. The video was inconclusive, showing no clear cause for the injury. Quinn's statement was consistent and believable. She was clearly traumatized by witnessing her student's medical emergency. The domino effect began immediately. Within hours, rumors were spreading through the school's social networks like wildfire. Colton Coleman, the untouchable prince of Riverside Academy, was fighting for his life in intensive care. His three accomplices were in shock, unable to explain what had happened. The story that emerged painted Quinn Russell as a hero, the caring teacher who'd tried desperately to save her student's life when he suffered a mysterious medical emergency. By Monday morning, the full scope of the disaster was clear. Colton's throat injury required emergency surgery to prevent asphyxiation, but the damage was extensive and permanent. His vocal cords were severely damaged, his larynx partially collapsed, and his dreams of sports commentary or public speaking were over forever. He would speak in a raspy whisper for the rest of his life, if he could speak at all. The football team was devastated. Losing their star quarterback and team captain destroyed their championship hopes completely. Derek Martinez, Kyle Patterson, and Austin Hayes were so traumatized by witnessing their leader's collapse that they quit the team immediately. The psychological impact of seeing their invincible hero reduced to a helpless victim broke their spirits entirely. Coach Williams canceled the rest of the season, citing insufficient personnel and team morale issues. Principal Peterson held an emergency assembly to address the crisis. She praised Quinn Russell's quick thinking and heroic efforts to save Colton's life, presenting her with a certificate of commendation for exemplary conduct under pressure. Quinn accepted the award graciously, her eyes still red from crying over her student's tragic accident. The irony was delicious, but her expression remained appropriately somber. The Coleman family's reaction was swift and predictable. They hired the best medical specialists money could buy, but the diagnosis was unanimous. Colton's throat injury was severe and irreversible. Their golden boy, destined for football stardom and political greatness, would spend the rest of his life speaking in whispers. His college scholarship was revoked, his social status evaporated, and his future crumbled like sand. More importantly, the culture of fear that had protected Colton for years began to collapse. Without their intimidating leader, his followers scattered like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Students who had been terrorized for months suddenly felt safe enough to speak up. Teachers who had lived in fear of the Coleman family's retaliation began to breathe freely. Quinn Russell had done more than defend herself. She had liberated an entire school. The investigation into Riverside Academy's bullying problem began 2 weeks later. Parents who had been silent out of fear started coming forward with stories of harassment, intimidation, and cover-ups. The pattern was clear and damning. For years, Colton Coleman and his crew had terrorized students and teachers alike, while the administration looked the other way. Principal Peterson was suspended pending a full review. Several board members resigned in disgrace. Quinn watched the school's transformation with quiet satisfaction. Hallways that had been ruled by fear were now filled with laughter and normal teenage conversation. Teachers walked with confidence. Students felt safe to be themselves. And the toxic atmosphere that had poisoned Riverside Academy for years was finally lifting. One perfectly placed uppercut had accomplished what years of complaints and meetings never could. 3 months later, Quinn Russell received a manila envelope in her school mailbox. Inside was a new assignment from the FBI. Westfield High School was experiencing a disciplinary problem, with several male students who seemed immune to traditional consequences. The pattern was familiar: wealthy families, athletic stars, and a culture of entitlement that put female teachers and students at risk. Quinn smiled as she read the briefing. Westfield's bullies had no idea what was coming for them. She had become something new in the educational world, a teacher who fought back, a protector who used extreme methods to defend the innocent. Her reputation was spreading through underground networks of educators who had suffered in silence for too long. The psychological evaluation of Colton Coleman made for interesting reading. The formerly arrogant teenager had been diagnosed with severe PTSD, anxiety disorder, and selective mutism. He spent his days in therapy, trying to understand how his world had collapsed so completely. The doctors said he might never fully recover from the trauma of his mysterious throat injury. His 3 former accomplices had transferred to other schools. Derek Martinez was still afraid to walk down empty hallways. Kyle Patterson jumped at sudden noises, and Austin Hayes had developed a stutter that appeared whenever he saw small women. They never spoke about what they'd witnessed in Quinn Russell's classroom. The memory was too traumatic, too impossible to explain. Quinn's teaching evaluations were glowing. Students praised her supportive classroom environment. Parents appreciated her dedication to safety, and administrators valued her calm handling of the Colton Coleman crisis. She had become the model of what a modern teacher should be: caring, professional, and absolutely uncompromising when it came to protecting her students. The final twist came 6 months after the incident. FBI investigators discovered that Colton Coleman's bullying ring had been much more extensive than anyone realized. Hidden cameras in his bedroom revealed hundreds of hours of footage showing him and his friends planning attacks on teachers, discussing sexual assaults, and bragging about previous victims who had been driven from their jobs, or worse. Most shocking of all was the discovery that Colton had been responsible for the accidental death of Miss Jennifer Patterson the previous year. Security footage from the stairwell, previously thought to be corrupted, was recovered by federal technicians. The video clearly showed Colton pushing the 28-year-old teacher down the stairs, then standing over her broken body with a satisfied smile. The evidence was overwhelming. Colton Coleman was arrested on charges of murder, conspiracy, and sexual assault, despite his damaged throat and psychological condition. His family's political connections couldn't save him from federal prosecution. Their golden boy would spend the rest of his life in prison, speaking in whispers about the teacher who destroyed his world with a single perfect punch. Quinn Russell watched the news coverage with professional satisfaction. Justice had been served, future victims had been protected, and a message had been sent to bullies everywhere. She packed her apartment efficiently, preparing for her new assignment at Westfield High. Somewhere in that school, predators were hunting innocent teachers and students, confident in their power and protection. They had no idea that their worst nightmare was coming. Quinn Russell, the quiet teacher who hit back, was about to show them that some educators refuse to be victims. Her uppercut had launched more than Colton Coleman's body. It had launched a new era of accountability for bullies who thought they were untouchable. The final scene showed Quinn walking into Westfield High School on a bright Monday morning. Her briefcase contained lesson plans, grading rubrics, and a detailed psychological profile of her new targets. She smiled politely at the security guard, introduced herself to the principal, and prepared to teach her first class. But if any student looked closely, they might have noticed something dangerous in her eyes. The calm confidence of a warrior disguised as a teacher. Sometimes justice comes in the form of a perfectly executed uppercut. Sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous of all. And sometimes, when the system fails to protect the innocent, teachers have to take matters into their own hands. Quinn Russell had learned that lesson well, and she was ready to teach it to anyone who needed the education. The story ended where it began, with the promise of violence delivered by someone who looked incapable of harm. But now the readers understood the truth behind Quinn Russell's transformation. She wasn't just a teacher who fought back. She was a weapon disguised as an educator, and bullies everywhere should be very, very afraid. The story ended where it began, with the promise of violence delivered by someone who looked incapable of harm. But now the readers understood the truth behind Quinn Russell's transformation. She wasn't just a teacher who fought back. She was a weapon disguised as an educator, and bullies everywhere should be very, very afraid. As Quinn settled into her new classroom at Westfield High, she arranged her desk with the same methodical precision she'd once used to plan military operations. Her gradebook sat next to a hidden file containing detailed intelligence on the school's power structure. The morning announcements crackled over the intercom, welcoming students back from winter break. Quinn smiled softly as she listened to the familiar rhythms of teenage voices in the hallways, but beneath her gentle demeanor lay the coiled readiness of a predator waiting for prey. Her eyes scanned each student who entered her classroom, cataloging potential threats and future allies. When a tall senior with expensive clothes and an arrogant swagger made eye contact and smirked dismissively. Quinn's pulse remained steady. She simply made a mental note and continued taking attendance. The cycle was beginning again, and this time she was ready from day one.